Hello and welcome back to A Book a Day podcast. The book that I've got with me today is called Love in the Time of Hate in the Mirror of Urdu. It's written by Rakhshanda Jalil, and those of you who are not familiar with her name, she's a really towering figure in Urdu literature in India. She's a writer, critic, translator, translated quite a few books actually. So if you are really into Urdu literature and if you want to read translations, you want to understand more about the history of it and read about different writers in Urdu, I think you should read her books. And the reason I picked this book for today is I was reading one of the chapters. It's called The Male Gaze, How Men See Women. And I found it really wonderful how she talks about the male gaze and how she explains how it happens uh, in the world of Urdu poetry. And I wanted to share it with you. So here we go. Let me share this chapter with you. So first of all, those of you who have been familiar with Urdu poetry and Urdu writing in general would know that the beauty of woman has been subject to great romantic and sensuous imagery in Urdu language. But then Jalil makes this very interesting point that when you're talking about woman's beauty, you are kind of just focusing too much on the physical beauty of her and not seeing her as a whole. This really traditional heterosexual way of men looking at women uh, that kind of sees the woman as an object. But of course, there have been those who, especially in the modern times, who try to transcend this particular way of looking at women. And that's what she talks about. She talks about different poets and how they saw woman. What was their gaze like? And she starts with the first one, Altaf Hussain Hali, who at the turn of 20th century, she says, formed kind of a bridge between the traditionalists and the modern poets. But essentially, he's once again, it reminds you of a very typical male gaze. So let me recite a few lines from his poetry, and I'll also translate it for the English listeners. It goes, तुम घर की हो शहजादियाँ, मुल्कों की हों आबादियाँ, वीरान दिलों की शादियाँ, ईमान सलामत तुमसे है, ए माओ बहनों बेटियों, दुनिया की जीनत तुमसे है. And it translates as, you are princesses of our homes, prosperity of nations, the harbinger of happiness to desolate hearts. Our faith is intact because of you. O mothers, sisters, daughters, you are the grace of the world. Now, think about it. It's kind of idealizing the role of a woman. And if you think about it, it's kind of like putting pressure on women to be in their idealized form. Another great poet, Allama Iqbal, national poet of Pakistan, he also, in somewhat flat representation of women, he says, तस्वीर कायनात में रंग इसी के साज से है जिंदगी का सोज़े दरून. And it translates as, the existence of women fills the world with colors. She is the instrument that creates the innermost songs. Again, very, very idealized version of seeing a woman. What about the progressives? Well, they had slightly different view, and their idea was to throw away the shackles of modesty and tradition, so they went the other way. And one of them is Kafi Azmi. He was a famous lyricist in Hindi movies as well. He says, "Ut meri jaan, mere saath hi chalna hai tujhe. Arise, my love, you have to walk beside me." So that kind of sloganeering there to rise up. And since we are talking about Hindi lyricists, one of my favorites is Sahir Ludhianvi, who was raised by a divorced mother, and he was very well aware of the kind of inequities that women face, and he was quite vocal about women's equality. So he writes, औरत ने जन्म दिया मर्दों को, मर्दों ने उसे बाजार दिया, जब जी चाहा मसला कुचला, जब जी चाहा धुतकार दिया. Translates as, woman gave birth to men, while men gave her the bazaar. They crushed and trampled her or rebuked her at their will. So kind of revolutionary here, talking about the plight of women, and compare that to the earlier poets who were talking about just talking about the idealized versions and how women were just beautiful and they should be that way. But it's very different. Then another poet, Majaz, asks, बताऊं क्या तुझे ए हमनशी किससे मोहब्बत है, मैं जिस दुनिया में रहता हूँ वो इस दुनिया की औरत है. What shall I tell you, my friend, of her whom I love? She is a woman of that very world in which I live. So, from idealism, we have come to pragmatism. Another interesting one is by Shakil Jamali, who says, "Abhi roshan hua jata hai, rasta wo dekho aurat aa rahi hai." The road is about to be illuminated. Look, a woman is coming this way. Another one of the great poets, Munawwar Rana, he writes, चलती फिरती हुई आँखों से अजान देखी है, मैंने जन्नत तो नहीं देखी है, माँ देखी है. So now, woman in the form of mother is being raised to another level here. It means with my own eyes I've seen the call to prayer. I have not seen heaven, but I have seen a mother. So that's quite an interesting way the women have been seen by the men in Urdu poetry. You can see the romance, you can see how they are trying to put them on a pedestal, but at the same time how the social forces are at play here. And in the end, Jalil ends the chapter by with the words of one of my favorite writers, Milan Kundera, and quotes him from his book, The Book of Laughter and Forgetting, which, by the way, is another wonderful book by him, and you should read it if you have read or liked any of Kundera's works. So she quotes this passage. It goes, "The male glance has often been described. It is often said to rest coldly on a woman, measuring, weighing, evaluating, selecting her. In other words, turning her into an object. What is less commonly known is that a woman is not completely defenseless against that glance. If it turns her into an object, then she looks back at the man with the eyes of an object. It is as though a hammer had suddenly grown eyes and stared up at the worker pounding a nail with it. When the worker sees the evil eye of the hammer, he loses his self-assurance and slams it on his thumb. The worker may be the hammer's master, but the hammer still prevails. A tool knows exactly how it is meant to be handled, while the user of the tool can only have an approximate idea." So in the end, Jalil says that while a woman is certainly not a tool, nor should she know how to be handled, there is something to be said for returning the gaze of looking back. So, if only more women were to turn a steady gaze back at the beholder, you never know what the seeing eye would see in that case. So, that's more about the male gaze and how it sees the women. Now, let me also talk about another interesting chapter which is on religious intolerance, and that's where the name of the book comes from this chapter, Religious Intolerance, Love in the Time of Hate, where Jalil talks about how in today's world, in today's India, we are facing this kind of polarization where Hindus and Muslims, they are going against each other, and in that, can we find any kind of hope through Urdu poetry, and can we find any consolation there? So she introduces us to once again different poets and their beautiful verses, starting with Majaz, who wrote हिंदू मुस्लिम सिख ईसाई अमन की मोती रो लेंगे, खून की होली खेल चुके हैं, रंग के धब्बे भी धो लेंगे. Translates as Hindu, Muslim, Sikh and Christian shall weep pearls of peace, having played holy with blood, they'll wash off the colored stains. That's the kind of trauma that India had after partition, where there were a lot of riots, and it just happened, and life moved on. What about other poets? Then there is this couplet by Anand Narayan Mullah, who says, मैं फ़कत इंसान हूँ, हिंदू मुसलमान कुछ नहीं, मेरे दिल के दर्द में तफरीक़ ईमान कुछ नहीं. Translates as, I am only a human, not a Hindu or a Muslim. The sorrow in my heart is not separated by dogma. Then there is one by Katil Shifai, who says, हमको आपस में मोहब्बत नहीं करने देते, एक यही ऐब है इस शहर के दनाओं में. They do not let us love each other. That is the only defect in the wise of this city. So clearly, seeing the divide, noticing it, but also giving some kind of hope that we will stand up for unity. Talking about hope, this one by Hafiz Banarsi is quite interesting. It says, सभी के दीप सुंदर हैं हमारे क्या तुम्हारे क्या, उजाला है हर तरफ इस किनारे उस किनारे क्या. That means everyone's lamps are pretty, not just yours or ours. The light is everywhere, not just on this shore or that. Then talking more about India and its unity, this beautiful couplet by Shafiuddin Nayyar. It goes, प्यारा हिंदुस्तान हमारा प्यारा हिंदुस्तान, जान फिदा है इस पर अपना दिल इस पर कुर्बान. Our dear Hindustan, our dear beloved Hindustan, we lay down our life for it, sacrifice our heart for it. But as I said, there is a lot of baggage too, and some of the poets talk about it. And one of them is Bashir Badr, who was a victim of communal violence himself, and his home in Meerut was looted and set on fire. So that's what he wrote then. He said, सात संदूकों में भरकर दफन कर दो नफ़रतें, आज इंसान को मोहब्बत की ज़रूरत है बहुत. That is, stuff all the hatred in 7 boxes and bury it deep. Today humans need love more than anything else. Another poet, Nida Fazli, he spoke of consequences of building picket fences of religious identity. He says, कोई हिंदू कोई मुसलमान कोई ईसाई है, सब ने इंसान ना होने की कसम खाई है. It says, they are a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian, everyone has taken an oath not to be human. And that very same sentiment, I'm sure you would have heard the song, तो हिंदू बनेगा ना मुसलमान बनेगा, इंसान की औलाद है इंसान बनेगा, written by Sahir Ludhianvi. It means you will not grow up talking to a child, the teacher is saying, you will not grow up to be a child, to be a Hindu or a Muslim. You're the child of a human and you shall be a human. Very similar idea, once again, shared by Kafi Azmi, who says, बस्ती में अपनी हिंदू मुसलमान जो बस गए, इंसान की शक्ल देखने को हम तरस गए. Ever since Hindus and Muslims have come to live in my neighborhood, it has been an age since I saw the face of a human. So pretty much every famous Urdu poet and lyricist has written about it, and it's quite interesting, and we still haven't been able to overcome that kind of polarization or fear or hatred of the other. But I'm sure there's a hope, and poetry is definitely a way to achieve that, maybe to feel inspired and hopefully our actions going in that direction. And finally, the chapter ends with the mention of another famous rather lyricist, Javed Akhtar, and he writes powerful lines. It's a long song, and let me recite it for you first in Urdu, then the translation. But I'm sure like you would like it. You would feel inspired if you see the kind of hatred that there is to see in our times. It goes, जो बात कहते डरते हैं सब, तू वो बात लिख, इतनी अंधेरी थी ना कभी पहले रात लिख, जिनसे कसीदे लिखे थे वो फेंक दे कलम, फिर खूने दिल से सच्चे कलम की सिफात लिख, जो रोज़नामों में कहीं पाती नहीं जगह, जो रोज़ हर जगह की है वो वारदात लिख, जितने भी तंग दायरे हैं सारे तोड़ दे, अबा खुली फ़िज़ाओं में अब कायनात लिख, जो वाक़यात हो गए उनका तो ज़िक्र है, लेकिन जो होनी चाहिए वो वाक़यात लिख, इस बाग में जो देखनी है तुझको फिर बहार, तू डाल डाल दे सदा, तू पात पात लिख. Let me translate it now. To speak of that which everyone is fearful of, that you must write. The night was never so dark ever before, write. Throw away the pens with which you wrote the odes in praise of the true pen, dipped in the heart's blood, write. The narrow circles that confine you, break all of them. Come under the open skies now of a new creation, write. That which finds no place in the daily newspapers, that incident which happens everywhere, every day, write. That which has happened finds mentions, but of those that should have happened, write. If you wish to see spring return to this garden, call out from every branch and on every leaf, write. And I think that's just the right kind of information, rather inspiration we need. That's the kind of thing that we should aspire for. That one, first of all, seeing beyond these religious boundaries, finding humanity, finding commonality in our differences, something that the earlier poets talked about. And finally, this Javed Akhtar's poem, which talks about writing. It inspires the writers and poets to write about these challenging times, these difficult issues, where a lot of things are happening, but a lot of things are not being reported. And it's an invitation to the writers and poets to write about it and not hold back, write from your heart. And that's just the right kind of inspiration, motivation that as an artist you need. So with that, I'll take your leave. I thought I would share something different with you today. Normally, for so long I've been talking about just English literature. I thought I would share something more Indian and even more than that, rooted in Indian culture and in its languages. And what's better than Urdu poetry? So I hope you'll get a chance to read this book or maybe some of the other books by Rakhshanda Jalil, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy Urdu literature, Urdu poetry through her writings. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll catch you the next time with another book. Thank you.